Hi, everybody. My name is Adriana Alejandre, and I'm the founder of Latinx Therapy. And today we are going to be talking about first gens and trauma. So let me introduce to you all our guest, who I will be having this conversation with. We're going to be speaking with Kathy Acosta, and she is a licensed clinical social worker in New Jersey. She is first gen and also a bilingual Spanish-speaking therapist. She's the founder of Hero Counseling, and that is her group practice out in New Jersey. She specializes in helping individuals who have experienced abuse, intimate partner violence, and intergenerational trauma. She helps many first-gen folks. She's passionate about mentoring clinicians as well, and also supporting new group practice owners. Today, we're going to talk about raising awareness of trauma, and we'll discuss commonly missed signs of trauma among first gens and our families. We're going to talk about recommended therapy approaches and how to care for our mental health long term. So let's go ahead and bring in Kathy.
Hello.
Hola.
Hi, thank you so much for having me to discuss this really important topic that I'm extremely passionate about.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you so much for being here. Kathy and I met just this year, but I think we've been kind of following and knowing of each other's work for maybe a little over a year. The pandemic has, skewed our
Yeah.
memory and things up. But Kathy, it is an honor. I'm very excited to be having this very important conversation with you. I think there's a lot of history, a lot of weight on first gens. And even though there's conversations on social media that touch on first gen livelihood, it's always necessary. There's always a need for more conversations, and raising awareness about something like trauma, it can also be preventative. It can be very helpful for our mental health in the long run. So my first question to you, Kathy, will be for our audience, and it is if you can help define what we mean by first gens, and then we'll define trauma.
Yeah, so first gens can have a really wide definition, right? So traditionally, what you think of a first gen is someone who they are the first generation that was born here, whether their parents came here when they were younger or parents came here as young adults, but you are the first generation born here. However, I have a lot of clients that I would also consider first gen that they were born, another country, but came here really young. So that to me is also someone who experiences a lot of the same whether it's trauma, stressors, or events as someone who was born here as their first generation. So I would consider both the first generation either born here or someone who came here very young from another country, because your experiences and your development are really going to be in this country.
And so when we're talking about trauma, we're talking about, well, everybody can define it differently, right?
For
Kathy
sure.
and I are clinicians. We go by our diagnostic manual, how we were trained, right? But also just the experiences that we get to learn from our clients. So, Kathy, for you, how do you define trauma with your clients and with your community?
Yeah, it's a really good question, right? Because trauma can feel like such a strong word. And when you come from a community or a culture that really doesn't talk about trauma and therapy, for you to say to someone, do you think that's traumatic? That may feel like a lot to them, right? So a lot of times I talk about like distressing events or situations that have happened in our lives, and that can be defined as traumatic. But really, it's all about our emotional or physical response to those situations or those series of situations or that one event. So I focus more on our response and our reaction to the situation or to the event that happened.
And that's really important because two people or multiple people can live under one household, under one roof for
Yeah.
many, many years, over a decade. And the reaction, the response that one may have to
Yeah.
a stressor may be different than the other people living there. Other people may define it as a trauma, whereas others may not. Let's take this outside of the home and into car accidents, right? When
Yeah.
there's, let's say, a fender bender, one person, the driver, may feel really impacted by that incident, whereas the passenger might be like, oh no, to me it wasn't traumatic, it was fine. But the driver now doesn't want to drive anymore, will
Yeah.
avoid places, will avoid conversations about cars, etc. So everybody responds
Exactly.
differently.
Yeah, exactly. And I also take into account what was normalized for us in our home,
Mhm.
right? And sometimes it's not normalized to have big reactions to something that we may feel is big, but it might have been minimized, or there wasn't just time to process it because there were so many other things going on.
And with that, Kathy, what are some signs of trauma that we may see in first gens?
A lot of my clients that I work with are really like high achieving, high anxiety. And that can lead to so many other things, right? When we think about anxiety, it's like how we respond to everyday events, how we cope with things or don't cope with things, what maladaptive behaviors have we created based on our experiences and situations. So high anxiety is something I often see, wanting to be like high achievers and having that stress and that pressure to do so. But then we also see depression when they feel like they haven't achieved those things that they thought they would or were expected to achieve. So those are some of the signs that I often see when it comes to first gens.
If you're watching this and if you feel like, because again, like this is just a 30-minute conversation around such a big topic, first gens and trauma, right? And so if there's anything that you feel like you can add to this conversation, please do so in the comment section. I really like to think that our platforms on social media here on the podcast, it helps other people feel seen. Like they're not the only ones thinking
Yeah.
this, they're not the only ones feeling this or experiencing whatever you're sharing. So if you're comfortable to do so and feel safe to do so, please add to this conversation in the comments. So yeah, I think another sign that I've seen in first gens is under that minimizing, where we minimize experiences.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
because there's this comparison trap, right, that we're kind of
Yep.
conditioned within our families that, because there's maybe worse things that happen. And being
Hmm.
part of collectivistic culture is that we tend to prioritize the needs of other people.
Yeah.
And sometimes, again, everybody's situation is going to vary. The way we respond may vary, but sometimes that can contribute to a traumatic situation down the road. Like people have expressed to me, like, I gave so much to this person, or I gave so
Yeah.
much in this situation, and I lost myself. And that to them could also be a trauma. When it comes to the signs of trauma in first gens, it definitely takes like thorough reflection, like a
Yeah.
full self analysis of the experience, and a lot of education about what trauma is.
Yeah.
Because we don't grow up, like Kathy mentioned earlier, talking about trauma in our families. On the contrary, right? It's often seen as a sign of weakness if you express
Yeah.
any mental health concern.
Going on off of what you just said, thinking that mental health or saying that you need help or you're not coping with something is seen as a sign of weakness, crying oftentimes, like, oh, that's not something really big, or that minimization, but also that mental health is just for anyone who's crazy, right? Like, why would you go to a therapist? I have so many clients who don't tell their family members that they're in therapy because they don't feel comfortable to do so, because they said they're going to think that I'm crazy. They're going to think something majorly wrong is going on. So I would say that's a huge myth within families of first gen. And like you said, there are so many that we can discuss, but I would say that's a major one that I feel like I talk to about with every single one of my clients.
Yeah, no, I definitely have experienced that as well as a therapist, and then also as a first gen. I've shared with
Hmm.
many of you my story, right, when I got pregnant in college and how difficult it was being in therapy in the counseling space, because I just kept hearing my mom's voice. We don't air our dirty laundry, right?
Yeah.
We solve problems in the family. And so that's why I didn't stay in therapy, because I felt so guilty, even though I felt so good at talking about this
Yeah.
to someone that I didn't feel was judging me, to someone that was just hearing me out. It felt unconditional in that
Yeah.
moment. So I think so many of us can relate to that. Like, you just feel guilty. And when you do get to share, I have had clients that share, I'm in therapy. Their family, typically their parents responds with, well, what are you saying about me? Why
Yes.
are you going?
Yes.
Like,
Yep.
as if
Hmm.
then it becomes something that now they're not emotionally safe again to express,
Yep.
even in adulthood. Not only did
Yep.
they experience this chronically in childhood where we're not emotionally safe, but now also in adulthood. You think that you have a safe space in therapy. And I think for first gens, you want to share because you feel like it would help your relatives to know that there is another alternative to
Mm-hmm.
healing. Maybe it's not just religion, maybe they can try therapy, but then you get this response, right?
Yeah.
This big reaction, and it dims the light in people.
Yeah. Yeah, oftentimes my clients will say, I'm the first one. I shared. They feel more comfortable sharing with like their generation, like their cousins or someone closer to
Mhm.
their age,
Yeah.
kind of like that. Okay, I told them, and maybe they had a slightly different reaction, or maybe they had the same reaction that their parents would have. But oftentimes, my clients are one of the first ones to get therapy, and it feels so good to be seen and heard. And so many of them are saying, I didn't know anyone else felt this way. I thought I was the only one that felt this way about therapy or about my family or about my experiences.
I want to add to this conversation. The purpose of this talk and any talks that we're having this season about first gen's mental health isn't to bash our relatives, right, that are not supportive of therapy or mental
Yeah.
health. And it's important for us to understand, that there have been circumstances,
Yeah.
lack of access to these resources, and that even though we're first gen and we're harmed emotionally, there's still a privilege when we as first gens are able to go to therapy
Yeah.
and to gain this type of awareness for our mental health. Even though it doesn't feel very validating, unfortunately, it's still a reality.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that I'm not saying this to tell you like you should continue talking to your family or stay,
No.
everybody has their own right to keep whatever contact they want to the relatives
Yeah.
that who they feel safe or not safe with, of course. But yeah, I just wanted to bring that up because I think that always comes up with our clients and with people out
Oh
in the
yeah.
community.
100%. I'm so happy you said that because I can tell you that I almost always have that conversation. Say in therapy, it's not to talk badly about your mom, your dad, your Theo. It's not about that. It is really to talk about how that experience impacted you and
Mm-hmm.
also honoring the fact that there are reasons why maybe mom or dad had that reaction. There are reasons why their experiences in their past. And that's where we kind of go into that intergenerational trauma and how things are passed down. But that is so often a conversation because a client will say to me, but I'm not saying anything about my mom. My mom. I love my mom. Like she did a really great job. And we almost have to go there with them and say, we're not saying they didn't, but we're also saying that your feelings are valid and your experiences are okay to talk about in this way.
Eso. Drop the
Yeah.
mic, Kathy. Drop it. So, what are the different types of therapies that you would recommend for first gens?
Ah, so well, I'm a little biased because I do EMDR, so I love EMDR, and I think that EMDR gets to not just processing, but also like I really truly believe there's a lot of somatic experiences, a lot of physical stuff that we hold in, right? When we don't express and we're not allowed to express those, or don't know how to, or we're not taught how to express those emotions that we have. So many things are in our body, and I know that EMDR does get to that, but there are other types of interventions that get to that where you're doing somatic work, also parts work. I know many therapists that do amazing parts work with doing some inner child work. I think that that's so incredibly powerful for first gens, right? Because a lot of what we're doing right now is we're trying to when we go to therapy as adults, trying to figure out the experiences that we had much younger, right? And getting in touch with those younger parts of us is so key for us to be able to process those experiences. There are many, many different forms of therapy or interventions that can be used. Those are just a few that I definitely would recommend. But to me, it's just get in there, talk to somebody. But on top of that, this was my personal experience when I decided to get therapy. It was super important for me to get someone who was a person of color. I happened to be very lucky and found a Latina that also spoke Spanish because there are certain things for me that I needed to say in Spanish. I couldn't say them in English. And that was so helpful because I felt like while my everyone's experience is unique, having a therapist that I could say, okay, I don't have to explain every detail of what that meant. I didn't have to educate my therapist on that piece of my experience. That was so extremely helpful. So just getting in there and really finding a therapist that you connect with on that level is so important.
When I first launched Latinx Therapy in 2018, I had a lot of emails from people telling me I never thought to choose or that I could choose. I never
Yeah.
thought that I could look for a Latina therapist. I always just went with whatever was given to me by my insurance company or just whatever
Yes.
was closest and available to me. But I think that our field has definitely increased a little bit in terms of
Yeah.
representation.
A
And it
little.
depends where, right? Like a little bit. It's
Yeah.
definitely better than the 90s, of course, but
Yes.
there's still a lot of work we need to get done. And if you're first gen and want to become a therapist, please reach out to us. There's definitely more room for us. But what I'm trying to say is that for any of you watching and that maybe you haven't started the process of looking for a therapist, but you want to, or you're curious about it, you get to
Yep.
choose. Even if
Yeah.
you're part of a therapy fund, like you have a choice to choose and deserve to. If you are part of the LGBTQ plus community, find a therapist that
Yeah.
identifies also part of the LGBTQ plus community. So I just want to give that and always advocate for that, because I think being first gen, sometimes we're taught to be grateful for so long
Yeah.
in childhood, que if we don't take, what is given, entonces we are malagradecidos, right? We're
Yeah.
ungrateful. And
Mm-hmm.
that's not the case when it comes to your wellness and your mental health care. It really does matter who you're seeing, because being with the wrong therapist can impact your mental health as
Oh, yeah.
well. It's
Yes.
another added stressor. For me, it was when the first therapist after UC Santa Barbara told me that I needed to cut financial ties with my family. For me, they weren't telling me, that I had to pay for things. I was doing it on my own will. And that just me cutting ties, I feel would have put my family and my family shelter as well, in like a very risky situation. That became more stressful until I snapped out of that and realized this therapist is wrong. I don't think this therapist understands my culture, and
Yep.
that it's okay for me to help my family, and it's okay for me to struggle a little bit. I say that to also give a picture that us therapists, like, we're here for you. We're holding the light, but you have the answers.
Yeah, definitely. And, when looking for a therapist, ask questions, seek that
Yes.
connection, right? And it's okay to say, that's not the right one for me, just, because
Mm-hmm.
they're the one that happened to call you back or answer the phone. Keep looking until you find the right one, because that connection, that seeing like, okay, this person can help me with what I need help with, that's going to make all the difference for you, especially if it's your first experience, right? Having that first experience, after that, you could have said, never mind, not going to therapy ever again, right? You did, thankfully, but some
Yeah.
people, once they have one bad experience, they don't do it again.
Yeah, completely.
Yeah.
So in the long run, whether it's with therapy or not therapy, what are some recommendations that you would give for folks who need to take care of their mental health long term?
Yeah. So, one of the things that I did personally and I found so incredibly helpful is I found other people like me, right? I found my group of other first gens that I really connect with. I feel like it was so important to be seen by my peers, because as first gen, there are so many spaces that we enter in that we don't feel seen, we don't feel accepted, or we feel behind, because maybe we don't understand those norms, or we feel like others have other tools. An example is higher education, right? You may have grown up in a town where, okay, there are other Latinos, other people speak Spanish. Then you enter higher education and you're in this whole entire other realm where you don't feel like you fit in. And now you're kind of toggling between two worlds, the world that you have at home with your culture, and then the world outside of that in higher education that may be predominantly white folks there. So find your people, outside of therapy, and make sure that you're making those connections, because there's so much healing and talking to each other about our experiences.
Truly, community for us is a protective factor, and it's
Yep.
something ancestrally that our lineage has been engaging
Yep.
in. And so it's within us, but being here in America often separates us, right, from our
Yep.
values or from what we know and our stories. And so I also find that when we share our stories, as Kathy is
Mhm.
saying, that it's very powerful. And I think that's also another thing, like why a lot of people can relate to Latinx therapy and our guest and what we share about, because you don't feel so alone. And
Yeah.
that also helps our mental health. So for long-term mental health care, I would say that it's important for us to know the signs of what we're going through, and even things that you're not going through. So let's learn the basics of what are the signs of depression? What are the signs of
Yep.
anxiety? What are the signs of trauma? What are the signs of grief? And there's ambiguous loss within grief, which means grief that is not connected to death, grief that is connected to another type of loss, like a separation. So, let's learn about all sorts of signs so that we can help ourselves, but also so we can recognize them in the community that we're in other people around us. And I find that to be very powerful for long-term mental health care, both individual-wise and community-wise.
Definitely.
And if you have any other suggestions, please, again, drop them in the chat below. Kathy, let's learn a little bit more about you, what projects you're up to, and where can people find you as we're winding down with this conversation?
Yeah. So where people can find me mostly is at a Hero Counseling Center. That is my group practice, and that's based out of New Jersey. The other place is my website, that's Hero Consultation. So I actually do consultations for those that are starting up their own practices, or mainly group practices as well, since I own my group practice. And I really end up only primarily working, not that I don't work with others, but my primary population that I work with there is first gens as well, because there's so many unique aspects of being a first gen and opening up your own business and all the things that come with that. And I am starting a new project. So it's called Latinx Practice Collective, where I am working with two other founders, two other members will be joining me with this project. And we're doing business consultation groups for those who are in solo practice or in group practice, and really creating community within them for New Jersey and New York. We wanted to be very specific in our area, to make sure that anything that comes with opening up your practice in those two states, we were able to help with and provide a lot of support. So that's my brand new baby that will be starting in January.
That's wonderful. Congratulations as a first gen, to another first gen. It's always incredible, to see other people creating for community, essentially. And because it is a love and a passion. So felicidades. I'm very excited for you. And with that, if you're in New Jersey and looking for a therapist, please connect with Kathy. Check out, we have it down below. Sorry, maybe this way in that corner, Hero Center NJ for New Jersey.com. And Kathy, thank you once again. Everybody else, please share this conversation. And if you are struggling with trauma and you're a first gen, and even if you're not a first gen, please check out our directory at latinxtherapy.com, in Spanish, terapiaparalatinos.com, and to find a provider in your state, the state that you live in. So with that, thank you so much, Kathy, for this plática, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you so much for having me.
Gracias.